Good morning, second period. Welcome to week 7. It's day 1. It's Monday, May 11th. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you were able to celebrate Mother's Day with someone special. Um, so today we are going to start session 12, which is a read aloud, and we're going to focus on weighing positive and negative messages in stories. Readers, you've been doing interesting work thinking about the issues that are challenging, not just for individuals, but for groups too. You've realized that often in stories, authors give a group of people an issue, a challenge, and at the same time, they give individuals their own traits and motivations. In doing that, they give readers messages about what's hard for groups in this world, but also about how people find ways to cope. And that combination is going to feel different in different stories. Do you remember how earlier in this unit we analyze relationships to think about their negative and positive sides? Well, just as we can analyze relationships to find negatives and positives, we can analyze stories to find negatives and positives. Because the issues that affect groups and individuals are complicated, and because every story is different, sometimes a story will feel like it's focusing a bit more on the negative, on the struggle, and sometimes a bit more on the hopeful, on the signs that people can find ways to deal. Before we go any further, think about the novel you and your club are reading now. Or if you have just started it, about the one you recently finished. What are some challenges that people are dealing with in your novel? Think about how a group or an individual is meeting those challenges and ask yourself at this point, does this book feel more negative, more about the struggle, or more positive and hopeful? When you have an idea, just kind of keep that in your mind. Some people may have been reading The Skin I'm In, talked about how the protagonist is learning that self esteem shouldn't be based on looks, but it is still felt a lot of the situation showed how hard this is to learn. Another book you might want to read in the future is The Crossover, and talks about how the characters were learning that sports are often more about just sports, and that it seems pretty positive at the point they were where they were. Readers, I'm listening to you. I want to name something you're doing that is really important. You're analyzing that sometimes stories will be teaching us some hard truths about group issues, and other times a story will offer some hope that people can cope with these issues, that it's not all bad to be part of this group. Great stories will offer negative and positive messages. Readers, when you're nearing the end of a story, which we are today, it can be interesting to take stock of the negative and the positive. You can start to think, is the story more negative or more positive in the way it presents issues about a group? One way to do this is actually track the parts where the story is focusing on what's hard for a group and the parts where individuals or groups find hope. This work is a little bit like preparing for a debate. The debate is, does the story have a more negative or more positive tone or overall? And does it focus more on struggle and hardship or more on coping and hope? Let's try thinking about this as we read the second half of Inside Out. I'll pause now and then you can ask 3 questions. You'll want to gather evidence by jotting details that are more about the struggle and what's hard, that's the negative side, and details that are more about how characters cope and find hope, that's the positive side. By the end, you'll have a club conversation within your mind to decide, is the whole story more negative or positive? You'll want to set up your notebook to take notes on both sides of this. You can make a T-chart, or you could use a top and bottom of a notebook page or a Venn diagram. Really, um, anything would work. Before we start, take a minute to remind yourself what has already happened. Are you replaying things in your mind? Think about it. Francisco is the narrator. He's starting first grade. His brother Roberto enrolls him. Roberto talks about his teacher having a roller and whacking him when he spoke Spanish. That was pretty negative. Francisco sees a caterpillar by his desk. That was more on the hopeful, positive side. Readers, when you resume reading after being away from a text for a bit, you always want to remind yourself what you've already learned. Rereading, even just a tiny bit of it, can really help. Let's do that, and then I'll read on. I was about to put my hand in the jar to touch the caterpillar when the bell rang. All the kids lined up outside the classroom door and then walked in quietly and took their seats. Some of them looked at me and giggled. Embarrassed and nervous, I looked at the caterpillar in the jar. I did this every time someone looked at me. Readers. Already there are negative and positive details here. Will you think with me for a sec? That's the very first part where all the kids come in and are looking at him and giggling. That feels hard, especially if he can't understand what they're saying or speak to them. Um, do you agree that this would go on our negative list? All right, so let's put that there. Meanwhile, let's think about the caterpillar. That seems to be what he turns to for comfort. Let's jot caterpillar in the positive side list. Remember that a detail might be an object or an image like the caterpillar, or it might be dialogue or action like the other students giggling. Just in front of the caterpillar, lying on the top of the cabinet, was a picture book of caterpillars and butterflies. I went through it page by page, studying all the pictures and running my fingers lightly over the caterpillars and the bright wings of the butterflies and the many patterns of them. I knew caterpillars turned into butterflies because Roberto had told me, but I wanted to know more. I was sure information was in the words written underneath each picture in large black letters. I tried to figure them out by looking at the pictures. I did this so many times that I could close my eyes and see the words, but I could not understand what they meant. My favorite time at school was when we did art, which was every afternoon after the teacher had read to us. Since I did not understand Miss Scalapino when she explained the art lesson, she let me do whatever I wanted. I drew all kinds of animals, but mostly birds and butterflies. I sketched them in pencil and then colored them using every color of my crayon box. Mrs. Scalapino even tacked one of my drawings up on the board for everyone to see. After a couple of weeks, it disappeared, and I do not know how to ask where it had gone. Readers, let's stop here to think. The picture books that Francisco can't read and the art lessons that the teacher teaches, but he doesn't understand, do these feel positive or negative for Francisco? And remember, there's no right answer. They could be a bit of both. Many of you might be thinking that there are positive and negative sides to these details. In some ways, they're showing how Francisco, as part of a group that doesn't speak English, finds school hard. But in other ways, they show how Francisco, as an individual kid with an imagination, finds ways to have fun and be interested in art. Feel free to add spots in your notes for details that are both. Or you could jot art or pictures for both parts of your notes. This is tricky, but it really helps us realize how authors create details that have a lot of meaning. Let's keep reading, listening for details that feel negative or positive, or maybe some of both. One cold Thursday morning during recess, I was the only kid on the playground without a jacket. Mr. Sims must have noticed I was shivering because that afternoon after school, he took me to his office and pulled out a green jacket from a large cardboard box that was full of used clothes and toys. He handed it to me and gestured for me to try it on. It smelled like graham crackers. I put it on, but it was too big, so he rolled up the sleeves about 2 inches to make it fit. I took it home and showed it off to my parents. They smiled. I liked it because it was green and it hid my suspenders. The next day, I was on the playground wearing my new jacket and waiting for the first bell to ring when I saw Curtis coming at me like an angry bull, aiming his head directly at me and pulling his arm straight back with his hands clenched. He stomped up to me and started yelling. I did not understand him, but I knew it had something to do with the jacket because he began to pull on it, trying to take it off me. Next thing I knew, he and I were on the ground wrestling. Kids circled around us. I could hear them yelling Curtis's name and something else. I knew I had no chance, but I stubbornly held on to my jacket. He pulled on one of the sleeves so hard that it ripped at the shoulder. He pulled on the right pocket and it ripped. Then Miss Scalapino's face appeared above. She pushed Curtis off me and grabbed me by the back of my collar and picked me up off the ground. It took all the power I had not to cry. On the way to the classroom, Arthur told me that Curtis claimed the jacket was his, that he had lost it at the beginning of the year. He had also said that the teacher told Curtis and me that we were being punished. We had to sit on the bench during recess for the rest of the week. I did not see the jacket again. Curtis got it, but I never saw him wear it. Wow, that was pretty intense part. How many of you found that part to be mostly negative? Yeah, I'm feeling that this was one of the hardest parts of the story so far. So I could just jot the words the jacket in the negative side of my notes, but that really doesn't give me enough detail. Then I might seem like the jacket is just as hard for Francisco as kids giggling, but does that seem equal? Instead, let's try to be more specific. Let's think about the real details, the specific images or actions in this scene that really make it hard. Well, for one, there's the part where he's the only kid without a coat. That seems very hard and important in the story. It's reminding us that Francisco is also part of another group, the group of kids who cannot afford new clothes. Can you think back and keep doing the work um, about smaller details that you can add to your notes, not just the jacket? You might have found that Mr. Sims seems like a kind of positive character. He sees Francisco's need, he needs a jacket, and he gives him one from the lost and found. It shows he's kind. Um, but a big negative detail is Curtis. It said he was angry like a bull, and then he just wrestled him to the ground without understanding Mr. Sims had given him the jacket. He's such a bully and makes Francisco's life even harder. I agree, and what's unfair is that both were punished for the fight, even though it wasn't Francisco's fault. That also seems negative. Even though they were both in trouble, I saw a new side to Miss Scalapino. She jumped right into the fight and grabbed Curtis off of Francisco. I think this really shows she cares for him, even though she had to show it through a fight. She protected him. I think this detail is going into both my columns. It was a bad situation, but she stepped up for Francisco is positive. Okay, readers, I'm going to read a longer part now, and in this is the end of the story. Listen closely, so we're going to talk to think about these questions again. Does the story have a more negative or more positive tone overall? And does it focus more on a struggle hardship or more on coping and hoping? Even though this is Francisco's story, it is also a story about a new immigrant going to school in America. Let's read to the end and jot down details that they seem to be saying. Life is really hard for people in this group. And also jot down details that seem to be saying there is hope for people in this group. For the rest of the day, I could not even pretend I was paying attention to Miss Scalapino. I was so embarrassed. I laid my head on top of my desk and closed my eyes. I kept thinking about what had happened that morning. I wanted to fall asleep and wake up to find it was only a dream. The teacher called my name, but I did not answer. I heard her walk up to me. I did not know what to expect. She gently me by my shoulders. Again, I did not respond. Miss Scalapino must have thought I was asleep because she left me alone, even when it was time for recess and everyone left the room. Once the room was quiet, I slowly opened my eyes. I had had them closed for so long that the sunlight coming through the windows blinded me. I rubbed my eyes with the back of my hands and then looked at my left at the jar. I looked for the caterpillar but could not see it. Thinking it might be hidden, I put my hand in the jar and lightly stirred the leaves. To my surprise, the caterpillar had spun itself into a cocoon and had attached itself to a small twig. It looked like a tiny cotton bulb, just like Roberto had said it would. I gently stroked it with my index finger, picturing it asleep and peaceful. At the end of the school day, Miss Scalapino gave me a note to take home to my parents. Papa and Mama did not know how to read, but they did not have to. As soon as they saw my swollen upper lip and the scratches on my left cheek, they knew what the note said. When I told them what happened, they were very upset but relieved that I did not disrespect the teacher. For the next several days, going to school and facing Miss Scalapino was harder than ever. However, I slowly began to get over what had happened that Friday. Once I got used to the routine in school, I picked up some English words. I felt more comfortable in class. On Wednesday, May 23rd, a few days before the end of the school year, Miss Scalapino took me by surprise. After we were all sitting down and she had taken roll, she called for everyone's attention. I did not understand what she said, but I heard her say my name as she held up a blue ribbon. She then picked up my drawing of the butterfly that had disappeared weeks before and held it up for everyone to see. She walked up to me and handed me the drawing and the silk blue ribbon that had number 1 printed on it in gold. I knew then I had received first prize for my drawing. I was so proud that I felt like I was bursting out of my skin. My classmates, including Curtis, stretched their necks to see the ribbon. That afternoon, during our free period, I went over to check on the caterpillar. I turned the jar around, trying to see the cocoon. It was beginning to crack open. I excitedly cried out, "Look, look," pointing to it. The whole class, like a swarm of bees, rushed over to the counter. Miss Scalapino took the jar and placed it on top of a desk in the middle of the classroom so everyone could see it. For the next several minutes, we all stood there watching the butterfly emerge from its cocoon in slow motion. At the end of the day, just before the last bell, Miss Scalapino picked up the jar and took the class outside to the playground. She placed the jar on the ground and we all circled around her. I had had a hard time seeing over the other kids, so Miss Scalapino called me and motioned for me to open the jar. I broke through the circle, knelt on the ground, and unscrewed the top. Like magic, the butterfly flew into the air, fluttering its wings up and down. After school, I waited in line for my bus in front of the playground. I proudly carried the blue ribbon in my right hand and the drawing in the other. Arthur and Curtis came up and stood behind me to wait for the bus. Curtis motioned for me to show him the drawing again, and I held it up so he could see. He really likes it, Francisco, Arthur said to me in Spanish. Como se dice esto en inglés? I asked. It's yours, answered Arthur. It's yours, I repeated, handing the drawing to Curtis. Wow, that was a lot. Think about what details seem particularly important here at the end of the story, and are they negative or positive? Readers, when you finish a story, it's a very interesting time to do some thinking about your questions. Does this story have a more negative or more positive tone overall? And does it focus more on struggle and hardship or more on coping and hope? We're at the end, so now we can look back across the whole of the story and figure out, does it seem like this story is offering a mostly negative or a mostly positive message about an issue? The details may show how groups and individuals in those groups can struggle due to these issues, and other details may show how groups and individuals can find ways to overcome these struggles. But what is winning out in this story? That takes looking back and doing two kinds of thinking. Take a moment to look back at your notes. Star the parts that seem to be the strongest, and also notice if you have more evidence in one or the other side of the argument. Readers, let's talk to explore this question. Today, we don't have time for a formal debate where we can take each side and argue it thoroughly. We could do that. There's evidence for both sides, but for the sake of time, let's talk more informally. Whoever speaks or thinks about a strong claim for your side, you'll start by thinking this story has a more negative tone overall, or this story has a more positive tone. Then you'll back up your claim with reasons and evidence. Okay? Such interesting thoughts. I think you can see how this is a powerful way to analyze a piece of literature. At the end of at the end or even as you're in the middle of a story, thinking through whether the story is mostly positive or mostly negative can help us look at the details in new ways. Let's try a bit of that in the short time we have left. Normally, of course, you set your own assignments, but for today, let's try something a little different. I'm going to ask you to read ahead, but do some rereading. Um, and you're going to focus on, is the part mostly negative or mostly positive? So we have a new teaching point. It is think through whether or not a story is more negative or positive overall. And make sure you have student individual responses to group related issues and ask, what can I learn from this? So your tasks for today, students, are that you are going to read chapters 27 and 28 from The Serpent King. I hope that you're liking that novel so far. Those characters are really interesting, and I think a lot of you can relate to them on some level. As you read, you're going to track the positive and negative scenes in the novel, and then you're going to rank the top 3 scenes on each side for their level of intensity for the characters. And that assignment is posted in Google Classroom, and the directions are there for you. So happy reading. Take a look at the positive and negatives and track those, and make sure you fill in the chart. I will see you tomorrow, and I hope you have a great Monday.